everybody, my name is Catriel Overton and I am presenting to you guys today on the need for Compassion International to change its child sponsorship model. So here we go, and I have a nice PowerPoint to go along with it. So I'm actually going to tilt this back a little bit. So the number of children who are sponsored through Compassion each year is currently 2.2 million children. And how sponsors currently think about the children they are sponsoring through Compassion, I have a quote to show that. Not unlike searching for the newest edition of a textbook or home supplies made exclusively by Martha Stewart, the highly customizable search options made available by Compassion International begin to frame children as objects that can be readily sorted and easily categorized. And this is from the article Digital Missionaries, and basically talked about how, as it said, like the idea of sponsoring children ended up sort of making children come out or seem like objects, and that wasn't good. So that's what this talked about. We're gonna move on to the next slide now. So this is my need step. And for the need step, I believe that Compassion International needs to emphasize empathy instead of sympathy or pity. And I just want to take a quick break and say why that is. So as we were just reading that quote that was about Compassion International sponsorship model, they were saying that children were thought of as like objects instead of people. And so that is one of the reasons why I believe empathy is needed instead of sympathy or pity for Compassion International. And then the sponsor and the sponsored child need to feel equal instead of the sponsored child feeling like, instead of the sponsor feeling like they're better than the sponsored child. And I believe that, I'm gonna sit down, sorry, that if the sponsor feels like they're better than the sponsored child, then that is actually unethical. So yeah, and there are some ways that I think this shows up. So how the sponsors currently perceive their child, or at least some sponsors perceive their child, is exemplified here in a quote that I'll read to you guys. As these organizations moved from relief work to NGOs and from war zones to the world, they replicated the vision of an active, rich, white North and a dependent, poor, non-white South. Mid-century sponsors rarely questioned this formulation, at least in their letters to the organizations they supported, likely because it had long been normalized within the binaries that structured 19th century slavery, imperialism, and scientific racism. And this is from the article that talked about Christian globalism at home. And so, that's not a great way for sponsors to be thinking about their sponsored child. So that is one of the reasons I believe we need to have Compassion International focus more on empathy than on sympathy or pity. And then I looked at the motivation of sponsors for sponsoring a child, and I will tell you guys about that now too. Compassion International is a Christian organization, and so it appeals to Christians and Christians' values. And I'm a Christian, and so I'm just kind of speaking this from my own personal experience. And one of Christians' values is ethics. As part of ethics, Christians are not allowed to overlook the poor. It says many times in the Bible that as Christians, we're supposed to take care of the poor. And that also relates to another concept from my persuasion class called ethos. And ethos is defined as the image or reputation of the speaker. And so basically, Christians, in order to maintain a loving image as a person, need to pay attention to ethics and not overlook the poor. Alrighty, we're gonna move on to the next step now. So this is the satisfaction step. And I believe that that Compassion International should change their marketing strategy from basically find a child with the same birthday as you, that's basically what it says on their website, to have you ever felt friendless and like no matter what you do, you could not make or keep friends? Have you ever struggled with doing well in school and no matter how hard you tried, you could not succeed? And like other more relatable and more empathetic versions of the sponsor and the sponsored child relating to each other. There is research that says people who experience a positive emotion when they see someone struggling are more likely to help the person who is struggling. And Bay states this: as individuals manifest negative empathy and feel the need to help others to reduce such negativity, those who experience a positive emotion keep their pleasant state through negative empathy and increase helping intention. And so I'll explain a bit in a moment what negative empathy is, but I'm going to finish this first. One example of a positive emotion is feeling like a person relates somewhat to another person's struggles, and in turn wanting to help the other person overcome their struggles because the original person knows how emotionally painful it is to struggle. So the whole idea of empathy is really what I'm pointing to here. And negative empathy is actually not what I'm pointing to, but negative empathy is basically you see a situation that's very sad, and instead of thinking, oh, I should do something to help that, you just get really stressed by it, and then so you don't really end up doing a lot to help it, is basically what negative empathy is. So yeah, all right. And then along with changing the marketing strategy, from finding someone with the same birthday as you, or the same birthday as the sponsor, Compassion Cash will also suggest multiple appropriate prompts for writing for the sponsored child, but especially for the sponsor to, but especially for the sponsor also, so that they can foster the value of the sponsor and the sponsored child feeling equal to each other. Now I want to take a quick break and say, I was a sponsor of a sponsored child, and it is very easy to either make the sponsored child, feel less than, or to have the mindset of being better than the sponsored child. So this is why I am suggesting that there should be some more letter prompts, because I struggled to figure out what to write, and like I would try to write things and be like, nope, that sounds too wealthy, and like that would be kind of like uncomfortable, I guess, for them. So yeah, and also you'll see some other reasons why I suggest letter prompts too. Yeah. So as I said, I used to write letters to the sponsored child. My mom and I sponsored together, and then after a while, I sadly stopped writing those letters to the child. And I think part of that, honestly, was because I didn't know what to talk about because there wasn't a lot of prompts. So that's part of why I'm suggesting there be more letter writing prompts. And then I also want to point out that stopping writing letters encourages the lesser than or sympathy dynamic between the sponsor and the sponsored child. And writing letters encourages empathy instead of sympathy, pity, or lesser than mindset. So it is really important that Compassion International does everything in its power to make the letter writing process as easy and simple as possible. Again, adding more letter prompts and making that more accessible and less like, I don't know what to write experience. So yeah. Visualization. Sponsors would be much more likely to continue writing letters to the child they are sponsoring because the sponsor would feel like they were writing to a friend, again, that idea of equals, instead of like they were writing to a person who needs help. So the sponsor can feel good about themselves. Without the sponsors feeling as if they are writing to a friend when they write to their sponsored child, the sponsors really don't care about the sponsored child's emotional well-being or day-to-day life. And because of that, they end up not really caring about writing them letters either, which then makes the sponsored child, or can lead to the sponsored child feeling lesser than the sponsor again. And I believe that the sponsored child feeling or thinking or whatever that they are less than the sponsor is unethical and is not a good practice to continue or enforce or any of that. So yeah. And more people would be interested in sponsoring a child because they would feel like they actually befriended/mentored this child. And I feel like I'm kind of pointing to the idea here of like a mentor, and they could be like a mentor to the sponsored child, especially with like shared struggles or similar struggles. Like obviously, I don't think the sponsors are going to have issues with poverty necessarily, but they may have both, maybe the sponsor and the sponsored child are both struggling in school, or they both struggle to have friends growing up. And so they could relate on like some of those dynamics. And even if they couldn't relate on those dynamics, they could like struggle in different dynamics, like say poverty and not being able to make friends, but they could still relate in the fact that they've both experienced pain, emotional pain. So yeah. And I believe that more people would be interested in sponsoring a child because they would be able to friend and mentor this child, as I just said. And then I also want to point out the affirmation of minimal effects theory, which exemplifies that making little positive changes in how people are viewed can lead to more profound behavior changes from society. And this theory states, as individual by individual changes in beliefs and attitudes accumulate, new shared norms emerge, resulting in widespread changes in audience behavior toward the topic. And this is from a previous class that I took, a previous communication class, and this is the author of the textbook, DeFleur. The authors, DeFleur. The sponsor and the sponsored child having things in common that were deeper than only birthdays, but even being able to relate to each other because of pain in their lives would help both the sponsor and the sponsored child to know that God loves and likes them equally, because God does love and like people equally, or at least he loves people equally, and the liking is not determined on whether or not you're doing well financially. So yeah. And even though sponsored child may be struggling more financially in life. So just the idea again of reminding the child and the sponsor that God loves the sponsor as much as he loves the sponsored child. And he does not play favorites between the two. And so it's not like the sponsor is supposed to rescue the child. The sponsor is supposed to love the child and not treat the child like some project to be rescued. So yeah, alrighty. Now my action step, we are here now. Alrighty, I believe that to help create a more equal and empathetic environment and to avoid a pity and sympathetic environment, that compassion could do some things to help with this. So as I've said before, compassion could suggest multiple prompts for letter writing topics. Again, the appropriate things like not like, I don't know, like appropriate topics to talk about. Because like you don't want to mention that you live in a mansion. I don't live in a mansion, but like say you lived in a mansion. You don't want to mention that you live in a mansion to somebody who's really struggling financially and is in poverty. That's really rude and not good to do. So like you want to be careful with those. And that actually shows up in more ways than you would think. Like I experienced that when I was trying to write my sponsored child letters. I was like writing something and my mom's like, nope, that is too rich sounding for her to be comfortable with that. So it's definitely harder than it seems to write letters that are appropriate and loving instead of making the sponsored child or children uncomfortable. And then another suggestion I have for Compassion International is that compassion could change how it tries to convince people to sponsor a child by changing its marketing strategy from an I-it marketing strategy to an I-thou strategy. So the I-it marketing strategy is where you look at a person as, it's kind of like the lesser than idea. Like there's the idea of a sponsor is basically sponsoring a child not to love the child, but just to feel good about themselves. Like that would be an I-it strategy. And like there were specific things I was learning about while I was researching for this project where like by the time you got through like the website, you felt like you almost owned the child. Like it was said my cart instead of just cart. And like on other things, it just would say cart, like Amazon.com or whatever was one of the examples I think at the time. So like that's concerning. And I-it is not respectful of us all being made in God's image and us all having equality and the same value as people. And so that's why I suggest I thou, which is the strategy of looking at another person as another person, not as an object. And I believe Compassion International could change their marketing strategy to reflect a more I thou strategy by changing some of those things on their website, like getting rid of the my cart and just saying like ready to sponsor a child or something like that. I don't know, as like a title. And also like making there be less options for how to narrow down as to which specific child you want, because that was kind of concerning. I was reading about that while I was researching for this, and it was really concerning to see how specific, like race-wise, age-wise, gender-wise, whatever, you could get to like sponsoring a child. Like that was a tad bit terrifying. Because I was like, this doesn't seem ethical either, because now it's like, what if you want like a white child who's 5 years old and a female? Like, what about the other children who aren't white, you know? Or like who aren't female, or who aren't 5. So that disturbed me, that was a thing going on with Compassion International's website. And I think they need to make it, maybe you could make like, if you really feel like you need to relate to a female child or a male child, maybe they could like make it so you could relate to that. But like, I don't think we need to have race and age and all that stuff involved, because I don't think that's loving to people. So yeah, so I definitely want to see Compassion International try to work more towards having an I thou strategy in their marketing and in how they go about the sponsorship process, instead of just trying to allow a strategy that makes the sponsors feel good, like they're doing something good, but makes the sponsored children feel forgotten or like they're just projects. Yeah. And as I was a sponsor, I was hearing how whenever the sponsors stopped writing letters, by the way, I think my mom continued to write letters, so that was cool. Yeah, I was a child at the time, so I was not very mature with writing the letters as much as I should have been. But basically, it's really sad for the children and very hard for them emotionally when their sponsors stop writing them letters. And I think, as I said before, that if we could get a more equal way of viewing each other, the sponsors and the sponsored children, then we would have more of a friendship, and that would continue the letters instead of more just like, I already did my part by sponsoring them, I don't need to take care of them anymore. And I don't like that I already did my part by sponsoring them, I don't need to take care of them anymore mindset. So that would be the action step. And then here are my references. Yeah, so yeah, I really want to see Compassion International change how they do their sponsorship strategy to make it more ethical and more loving and less racism based too. So yeah, I believe that sponsoring a child can be a beautiful thing for the sponsored child and for the sponsor too. But I believe that there are ways it can go badly also. So I think it's really important to put in the structures that need to be in place to ensure it can go as well as possible. And I think some of the things I suggested and some of the things I pointed out that need to be changed would be some of those ways to help this process go better and be more loving towards people. So yeah, this is my presentation, and I hope you guys have a great day, and thank you.